1976 was the year of America's bicentennial, the year punk knocked on the door, the year disco ruled the dance floor, and somewhere in the middle of all that, a whole collection of songs came and went that most people have completely forgotten. Here are 15 weird songs from 1976 you probably didn't know. Number 15, The Rubber Band Man by The Spinners, 1976.
Hey, y'all, prepare yourself for the rubber band man.
The Spinners had been making music since the late 1950s, a vocal group from Detroit who spent a decade at Motown without a major breakthrough, before signing to Atlantic Records in 1972 and immediately charting. By 1976, they were one of the most consistently reliable soul acts on the radio, professional, polished, and capable of delivering warmth into a room that most producers would have been happy to accept. The Rubber Band Man was something different from their usual mode.
Never heard a sound like the rubber band man.
Written by Tom Bell and Linda Creed, the Philadelphia soul production team responsible for some of the smoothest music of the era, the Rubber Band Man was based on a real person, an enormous man who regularly rode the bus in Philadelphia and played a Jew's harp that Tom Bell saw him with one day. The image of this large man on public transit playing this tiny percussive instrument with evident joy struck Bell as something worth capturing. He went home and wrote the song. The track features one of the more distinctive bass lines in 1970s soul, an arrangement that builds from a deceptively gentle opening into something considerably larger, and a vocal performance from lead singer Philippe Wynne that has a bouncing quality matching the song's subject matter. It reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in October 1976 and number 1 on the R&B chart. It became one of the Spinners' most recognizable songs. And the story behind it, a bus-riding man with a Jew's harp inspiring one of the era's better pop singles, is exactly the kind of detail that gets lost when a song is reduced to a chart position.
Hey, y'all, prepare yourself for the rubber band man.
Number 14, Let Her In by John Travolta, 1976.
Gonna let her in. Gonna let her in.
Before Saturday Night Fever, before Grease, before anyone outside of New Jersey and the viewers of Welcome Back, Cotter had strong opinions about John Travolta. He released a solo single in 1976 that reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song was called Let Her In, written by Gary Benson, and it is a gentle, acoustic-inflected soft rock ballad that sounds nothing like anything Travolta is associated with now.
Gonna let her in my life.
Travolta was 22 years old, already playing the role of Vinnie Barbarino on Welcome Back, Cotter, and already being marketed as a teen idol by the show's fan base. His record label, Midland International Records, clearly believed there was a commercial opportunity in his face and his fan base, and moved quickly to exploit it. Let Her In was released in May 1976. The production is tasteful and restrained. The performance is genuinely pleasant. Travolta can sing in the way that most young men of 22 who have been performing since childhood can sing, competently and with feeling, if not with any particular technical distinction. The song spent 21 weeks on the Billboard Hot 100. It reached number 10, meaning John Travolta, on the strength of soft rock appeal alone and before anyone had seen him dance, briefly had a top 10 single. The next year, Saturday Night Fever made him a different kind of star entirely, and Let Her In became a piece of trivia. Travolta released a follow-up single, Whenever I'm Away From You, which reached number 38. And then the movies took over completely.
Gonna let her in. Gonna let her in.
Number 13, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot, 1976.
Later that night when the ship's bell rang, could it be that
Gordon Lightfoot had been writing and recording folk songs since the early 1960s, a Canadian singer-songwriter whose catalog was vast and whose influence on the folk pop tradition was substantial. Neil Young and Bob Dylan both spoke highly of him. By 1976, he was a known quantity on the radio, a dependable presence with a specific acoustic warmth that suited certain kinds of listening. The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was unlike anything else on pop radio in 1976. It is a 6.5-minute narrative ballad about the sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, an ore carrier that went down in Lake Superior during a storm on November 10, 1975, killing all 29 crew members. Lightfoot read about the disaster in Newsweek magazine and began writing the song almost immediately. He researched the story thoroughly and composed a ballad that reads almost like maritime journalism, specific in its details, careful in its geography, and genuinely mournful for men he had never met.
When supper time came, the old cook came on deck saying, fellas.
The song reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in November 1976, a year almost to the day after the ship sank. It was the longest song to reach the top 5 on the Hot 100 since Don McLean's American Pie in 1972. Radio programmers who would ordinarily never play something over 4 minutes accepted it because the song demanded to be heard in full. Lightfoot later acknowledged a factual error in the original lyrics regarding the direction from which the ship's final distress call came. He re-recorded the line and replaced it in all subsequent pressings. The families of the Edmund Fitzgerald's crew have spoken over the decades about what the song meant to them, a piece of music that kept their fathers' and husbands' deaths in public memory long after the news cycle had moved on.
And later that night when the ship's bell rang, could it be the...
Number 12, Misty Blue by Dorothy Moore, 1976. Dorothy Moore was a Jackson, Mississippi-born soul singer who had been making records since the mid-1960s without breaking through nationally. Misty Blue was originally recorded by Wilma Burgess in 1966 and later by Eddie Arnold and Joe Simon, none of whom had taken it anywhere particularly significant. When Moore recorded it in 1975, she did something the previous recordings hadn't quite managed. She stripped the arrangement back and put the focus entirely on the voice.
Turns the flicker to a flame.
The version that was released in early 1976 is one of those recordings that sounds like it was made in a single take by someone who had been living with the lyric for years. Moore's voice has a quality that is both technically controlled and emotionally raw at the same time, a combination that is harder to achieve than either quality alone. The production, handled by James Stroud, gives her room to breathe and then gets out of the way. Misty Blue reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the R&B chart in 1976. It was Moore's only major pop crossover hit. Subsequent singles charted on the R&B chart, but never broke into the pop top 20 again. She has continued recording gospel and R&B music in Mississippi over the decades since, performing regionally and maintaining a devoted following that understands exactly what she did on that recording. Number 11, More by the Andrea True Connection, 1976. Andrea True was a pornographic film actress from Nashville, Tennessee, who had been working in adult films in New York in the early 1970s when she ended up in Jamaica for a film shoot and found herself stranded there when the film's producer absconded with the production budget. While waiting for the situation to be resolved, she recorded a disco single with local musicians to make money. That single became More. The song was released in February 1976 on Buddha Records and reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 in April of that year. It reached number 5 on the R&B chart. It became one of the earliest significant disco crossover hits on mainstream pop radio, arriving before the genre had fully colonized the charts while the audience was still catching up to what was happening. True's background in adult films was known in the industry and not particularly hidden. She was billed as the Andrea True Connection, partly because her name was already attached to a specific kind of film. The song's title and its delivery carried an obvious double meaning that radio programmers chose, collectively, to treat as innocent. The production is excellent, propulsive, clean, with a melodic hook that doesn't overstay its welcome. True made a handful of follow-up records that charted modestly before her moment passed. The song has been covered, sampled, and remixed dozens of times over the decades. Number 10, Devil Woman by Cliff Richard, 1976. Cliff Richard had been famous in the United Kingdom since 1958, when Move It introduced him as Britain's answer to Elvis Presley. He had spent the intervening 18 years as one of the most consistently popular entertainers in the country. Hit records, films, television specials, a career so thoroughly established in British culture that it had become something like furniture.
Beware the devil woman, she's gonna get
Devil Woman was the first Cliff Richard song to reach the American top 10. It peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1976, the only time in his career that Richard cracked the top 10 in the United States. The song was written by Terry Britten and Christine Holmes, and it is considerably darker than most of Richard's catalog. A warning about a woman with supernatural powers, told in a minor key with a hard rock guitar line that sounds nothing like anything Richard had previously recorded. The arrangement has an edge that sits uncomfortably with his public image, which may have been entirely deliberate. In the United Kingdom, Devil Woman reached number 9 and was considered a somewhat surprising direction for an artist who had been, by that point, recording for nearly 2 decades. The song opened a brief window onto an American market that had previously been indifferent to Richard's work. It closed again almost immediately. Subsequent US singles charted modestly or not at all. In the UK, Richard continued as reliably as ever, going on to have number 1 hits in 4 consecutive decades, and eventually being knighted in 1995.
She's just a devil woman with evil on her mind.
Number 9. Get Up and Boogie by Silver Convention, 1976. Silver Convention were a Munich-based studio project created by producers Michael Kunze and Sylvester LeVay in 1974, assembled specifically to capitalize on the emerging disco market. The group had no fixed membership in its early period. It was a production concept with interchangeable vocalists rather than a band in the conventional sense. The 3 women most associated with the Silver Convention name, Ramona Wolfe, Linda G. Thompson, and Penny McLean, were session singers who became the public faces of the project. Fly Robin Fly had reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in November 1975, staying there for 3 weeks. Get Up and Boogie, that's right, reached number 2 on the Hot 100 in April 1976. Both songs operated on the same principle: relentlessly driving beats, minimal lyrics, maximum repetition. Fly Robin Fly contained fewer than 30 unique words in its entire runtime. Get Up and Boogie was not significantly more wordy. The Silver Convention approach to disco was stripped down to its essential mechanics. There was no pretense about narrative or emotional complexity. The songs were engines for movement and nothing more. Kunze and LeVay went on to produce many other successful acts in the Munich sound tradition. The Silver Convention concept dissolved after a handful of albums. Number 8. With Your Love by Jefferson Starship, 1976.
I got to know what you're doing me with your love.
Jefferson Airplane had been one of the defining bands of the San Francisco psychedelic movement, politically engaged, ambitious, genuinely strange in the best ways. By 1974, after a series of lineup changes, they had become Jefferson Starship, a different entity built for a different commercial moment.
What you doing me with your love? With your love. What
With Your Love was released in July 1976 as the lead single from the album Spitfire and reached number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100. Written partly by Marty Balin, the founding Airplane member who had returned after several years away, the song is soft rock, unambiguously. There is nothing in it that connects to the political fire of Volunteers or the extended experimentalism of the original band's peak albums. For longtime Jefferson Airplane fans, this was a genuine point of grief. For listeners without the backstory, it was a pleasant mid-tempo ballad with a good vocal. The tension between what the band had been and what it was becoming ran through Spitfire and the years that followed, generating an argument that never fully resolved and eventually split the band along exactly those lines.
I got to know what you're doing me with your love.
Number 7. Moonlight Feels Right by Starbuck, 1976. The story of how Moonlight Feels Right became a hit in 1976 is one of the better examples of sheer stubbornness in the history of pop music. Starbuck was an Atlanta band built around singer and keyboardist Bruce Blackman and percussionist Bo Wagner. The song was recorded in September of 1975 in 3 hours of studio time. Leonard Skinner were booked in directly behind them, and there was no running overtime. Every major record label in America passed on it. The two consistent reasons they were given: it wasn't Southern rock and it wasn't disco. Blackman and Wagner responded by buying 500 copies of the record and hitting the road. Blackman went west, Wagner went east, and the two of them physically walked into radio stations across the country and played it to anyone who would listen. One station in Birmingham, Alabama liked it but told them it sounded like a spring song, and they'd wait until spring to play it. That Birmingham station became the first to break it, and the song began to climb. It entered the Billboard Hot 100 at number 90 on April 17, 1976, and took 15 weeks to reach its peak of number 3. By then, the marimba solo that Private Stock Records had tried to convince them to cut, telling them it was too long, had become the song's most beloved element. Bo Wagner's marimba playing across the track is the detail that makes the whole thing feel like summer, in a way that most soft rock of the era never quite achieved. Blackman later wrote a book about the experience. The Road to Moonlight Feels Right. The band had one more minor hit, Everybody Be Dancin', in 1977, but never broke through again. The one song has, by Blackman's own account, made him a comfortable living for 50 years. Number 6. This Ain't the Summer of Love by Blue Oyster Cult, 1976. Blue Oyster Cult are primarily remembered for one song, Don't Fear the Reaper, which also came from 1976. But the album that contained it, Agents of Fortune, opened with something that set the tone in a different way. This Ain't the Summer of Love is a hard rock statement of purpose, a 2.5-minute song that took the language of the hippie era and said, flatly, that it was over. Blue Oyster Cult had formed in Long Island in the late 1960s, managed by rock critics Sandy Pearlman and Richard Meltzer, and built a sound that was heavier and stranger than most of what was coming out of New York at the same time. By 1976, they were an established arena rock act with a cult following and a catalog that rewarded close listening. Agents of Fortune was their commercial breakthrough. The Reaper became a top 10 hit, but the opening track was the more pointed piece of writing. The song references the Summer of Love marketing mythology of 1967, the period when the music industry packaged the counterculture and sold it back to itself, and dismisses it entirely. Written by Mark Bolan of T-Rex and Alan Lanier of Blue Oyster Cult, the song was a collaboration that came from Lanier's relationship with Patti Smith, who had been part of the same downtown New York creative world as T-Rex's circle. The guitar line is lean and taut, the vocal delivery is dry, and the whole thing moves in under 3 minutes without wasting a word. Number 5, More Than a Feeling by Boston, 1976. Boston's debut single is not obscure. It's one of the most recognizable guitar songs of the decade, but the circumstances of its creation are genuinely strange, and the story behind the record earns it a place on any list of 1976's unexpected surprises. Tom Scholz, the guitarist and producer who was the primary creative force behind Boston, was an MIT graduate working full-time at Polaroid when he began building a recording studio in his basement. He constructed the equipment largely from scratch over several years, modifying and building components to achieve a guitar sound that commercial studios couldn't replicate. He recorded the demos for the entire first Boston album in that basement, alone, working nights and weekends. The demos were so fully realized that the finished album barely differs from them. The record label expected re-recording in a professional environment. Scholz delivered an album that was largely his basement recordings. The debut Boston was released in August 1976, reached number 3 on the Billboard 200, and eventually sold over 17 million copies in the United States. One of the best-selling debut albums in American history. The man who made it had been rejected by every major label and built the studio himself. Starland Vocal Band beat him for Best New Artist at the Grammys. That particular Grammy remains one of the award's more memorable miscalculations. Number 4, Shake Some Action by the Flamin' Groovies, 1976. The Flamin' Groovies had been making music since the late 1960s, a San Francisco band who had spent most of their career being out of step with whatever was happening around them. In the mid-1960s, when San Francisco was producing psychedelia, the Groovies were playing straight rock and roll. In the early 1970s, when arena rock was ascending, they were recording stripped-down recordings that anticipated what punk was about to become. Shake Some Action, released in 1976 on Sire Records, is frequently cited by musicians and critics as one of the great songs of that era that almost nobody heard in real time. It is a guitar song built on the harmonic and melodic architecture of the mid-1960s, the jangle of the Byrds, the energy of early British Invasion records, played with a precision and passion that made it sound simultaneously like the best of what had come before, and an argument for why that approach still had things to offer. The song was produced by Dave Edmunds, who had an instinct for recording guitar bands in ways that preserved the physical impact of the playing. It appeared on an album of the same name and received no meaningful commercial promotion. It charted nowhere. It became known over the following decade as a critical touchstone, cited by punk and new wave musicians as an influence, included on countless lists of the best songs nobody heard, studied by guitarists trying to understand how the rhythm and lead guitars work together to create something that feels inevitable. Nick Lowe, Elvis Costello, Chris Difford of Squeeze, and Tom Petty have all named the Flamin' Groovies as an influence. The song gets better every time you go back to it. Number 3, Disco Duck by Rick Dees, 1976. Rick Dees was a Memphis radio disc jockey who recorded Disco Duck as a novelty side project with no commercial ambitions. The song featured Dees doing a cartoon duck voice over a disco beat, a parody of the craze overtaking pop radio in 1976. Dees has said he wrote it in an afternoon and didn't expect anyone to take it seriously. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in October 1976 and won a Grammy Award. Rolling Stone readers later voted it the worst song of the 1970s in a 2011 poll, giving it the distinction of being both a number 1 hit and the decade's most reviled single simultaneously. The recording's success had an unexpected legal dimension. RSO Records released it in the United Kingdom without a proper licensing agreement. Dees sued, and the settlement worked in his favor. The radio career that followed was considerably more lasting than the recording career. Dees became the host of Rick Dees' Weekly Top 40, a nationally syndicated countdown that ran for decades on hundreds of stations. He turned one duck voice into a radio empire. Number 2, Love Hangover by Diana Ross, 1976. Diana Ross had been a superstar since the mid-1960s with the Supremes, and her solo career through the early 1970s had continued at that same commercial altitude. Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Touch Me in the Morning, Lady Sings the Blues, Mahogany. By 1976, she was one of the most established performers in American popular music, which made the direction she took with Love Hangover genuinely unexpected. The song was produced by Hal Davis and began as a quiet, restrained ballad. And then, at around the 2.5-minute mark, it transforms entirely into an extended disco groove, the tempo doubling, the rhythm section driving hard, and Ross's voice shifting from delicate to urgent. The full album version runs over 7 minutes. The transition between the two halves is one of the more striking structural moments in a pop song that year. Love Hangover reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in May 1976 and spent 2 weeks there. It was the biggest hit of that year for Motown, which was itself in transition, having recently relocated from Detroit to Los Angeles and working to redefine itself in the post-soul pop landscape. The song was used on dance floors and in clubs as much as it was on pop radio, bridging the gap between Ross's established audience and the emerging disco crowd. As a piece of structural music making and the way it builds, breaks, and rebuilds, it is considerably more interesting than its reputation as a disco-era product suggests. Number 1, Forever Lovers by Al Martino, at 1976.
Was the beginning of their lives together, anxiously they'd wait.
Al Martino had been recording since 1952 when Here in My Heart made him the first artist to reach #1 on the UK singles chart when it was launched. He had spent 24 years making records, was known to a new generation as Johnny Fontaine in The Godfather, 1972, and by 1976 was deep in the adult contemporary market, a consistent if commercially modest presence. Forever Lovers reached only number 67 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1976. By any conventional measure, it was a minor chart single from a veteran performer well past his commercial peak. But the song itself is something else entirely.
She reached inside her brand new traveling bag and found her brand.
It is a ballad about a woman whose husband dies on their wedding night, before the marriage is consummated. She keeps the hotel room. She keeps the wedding dress. She returns to the same room at the end of her life, puts on the dress again, now yellow with age, and waits to join him. The song covers a lifetime in just over 3 minutes, and the accumulated weight of all those years is carried entirely in the performance. Martino, by 1976, had the kind of vocal craft that only comes from decades of working in rooms of every size. The ability to locate the emotional center of a lyric and deliver it without over-singing. Forever Lovers is not a song that makes a lot of noise. It makes its impression quietly and then stays with you. The fact that it peaked at 67 and barely anyone remembers it is one of the small injustices of the pop chart system, which has never been particularly good at recognizing the difference between commercial success and lasting beauty. Martino died in October 2013 at the age of 82. He had been recording for over 60 years. Forever Lovers is the song from that catalog that the fewest people have heard and the most people, once they've heard it, find they can't quite shake.
Was the beginning of their lives together, anxiously they'd wait.
If any of these took you straight back to 1976, hit the like button and subscribe. There's a whole decade of stories like these waiting for you.